I say welcome to Vessela Tcherneva, Deputy Director of European Council on Foreign Relations and an important Bulgarian foreign policy expert. We continue our periodic meetings with her and discussions on changes in the region and also within Bulgaria. Today we are going to focus on the region which is comprised of Central and Southeastern Europe. And starting with this idea, Politico has been writing for a number of months or even a longer period that there is something called eastward shift in the center of power inside the EU. There is a general feeling that Germany and France are now weakened after the EU elections in political terms, both internally with the problems of their governments, and also they quarrel with one another. At the same time, Poland is often given as an example of doing the right things, meaning militarization, for example, and also affirming economically and in other ways as some kind of a leader of the eastern part of the EU. And negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova for accession to the EU also started. So these are all various arguments for the discourse that there is some move to the east of the center of power inside the EU. But do you think this is a real process or real fact, or is it more media theory?
I can give you immediately a couple more examples. For instance, the fact that the High Representative for Foreign Policy is Estonian, the fact that the new Defense Commissioner, Mr. Kubilius, is a Lithuanian, and the Enlargement Commissioner is a Slovenian, Ms. Marta Kos. This is all testimony to the and I shouldn't forget, of course, that Mr. Piotr Serafin is most probably going to be the first Polish budget commissioner in the eve of the negotiations for the next multi-annual financial framework. So this is this really testifies for a growing, I think, influence of Central and Eastern Europe, especially in terms of the European defense policy, which is probably the biggest new area that Europe is adding to its integrational project. This is due to the fact that all those Eastern European nations and politicians have been warning for a long time now that Russia is not going to stop after Georgia in 2008 and after Ukraine in 2014. Their warnings had been neglected in the past. They had been even ridiculed by others in the EU. And now there is this feeling that Central and Eastern Europe has kind of the right to play a bigger role in European foreign and security policy. So I would say this is there is a lot of truth to that theory. On the other hand, we cannot regard the region as a coherent group, because we saw what the Orban policies vis-a-vis Russia and basically defending the Russian interest within the EU has done to the Visegrad group. It basically destroyed the Visegrad Four, and Hungary, but also Slovakia, have become difficult interlocutors um, for the rest of Europe, but especially for the neighbors. The Hungarian-Polish relationship is really in a very low point right now, and so we see a lot of Polish-Baltic cooperation, but also cooperation also with the Scandinavian countries on things related to defense and security. And I would say that if we're looking for an alternative to the German-French engine of European integration, as we used to know it, it is probably some sort of a Central and North European coalition more than kind of the previous Visegrad cooperation that we were seeing in the previous decade.
Okay, you mentioned that war in Ukraine is accelerating this process of, let's call it, eastward shift in some way in the power in the EU. How should Bulgaria and Romania, as a little bit more specific countries in the region too, react to this tendency, and what could be the content of any greater cooperation with these, let's call them a little bit more peripheral countries in a comparison to the core countries, Germany and France?
I think that we cannot put Bulgaria and Romania in one sentence here, because for Romania, the strategic imperative to defend itself against Russia has been very consistent and very clear from the beginning of the war, but also before that. And now Romania is going to be the home of a large international brigade, military brigade for a long time. It's not kind of a one-off exercise, and I think in general Romania's posturing also in defense terms, but also its positioning within the EU has been really very stable and very reliable, in the sense that Romania is the second largest country in our region after Poland, has also been gaining importance while the PiS government was in power in Poland, and was creating also problems within the EU. So those understanding of the defense imperative for Romania and its kind of growing importance within the EU, I think make it a very different player compared to Bulgaria. Bulgaria had, I think, very kind of clear position on Russia, only with the Petkov and the Denkov governments. For the rest, it has been relatively, should I say, obscure, because the caretaker cabinets have been saying the right things, but have not been acting really that much. We see Russian gas back to Bulgaria disguised as Turkish gas. We see actually not enough measures to stop the Russian influence here. And we see the growth of the pro-Russian party Возрождение. So all of that, I think, makes Bulgaria look much more vulnerable and much softer on Russia than Romania.
Okay, if I could paraphrase a little bit the question, I guess this supposed eastward shift of power in the EU creates some opportunities for countries of the periphery. So even though Bulgaria and Romania have their specifics in terms of relation to Russia, there is also this thing that there is great Western European investment in Romania, also in Bulgaria, I guess. And perhaps if ties with other countries different from the core countries in the EU are to be created, there must be also some economic grounds and some other grounds, not only the grounds related to defense. So do you think there are really chances that some new relations and some new dynamics is created between Bulgaria and Romania beyond and these countries which rise in the periphery of the EU beyond the core right now?
I am aware that we try to separate the defense issues from the rest, from the economic issues, from the cultural issues, and so on and so forth. But the fact is that we talk these days about security in many spheres. We talk about security of borders, we talk about energy security, economic security, about food security, and this is why I think this kind of aspect is important. But if we consider the EU context, Bulgaria and Romania have a role in the sense that together they, and maybe also with Greece and Croatia, and you and I, we have been talking about this before, this regional kind of coordination is one thing that that is missing and that we should be doing more. So I would say this role of connecting the Western Balkans with the Black Sea region is going to be growingly important for the EU in strategic terms. That has to do with connectivity, that has to do with nearshoring, if you like. It can add to the capacities on renewables. And I mean, you of course have also the military mobility aspect and so on and so forth. But that brings us back to the defense and security aspect.
Okay, following the start of the war in Ukraine and all the processes that unfolded, we see that there is somehow push for greater infrastructural connectivity, as you said, and also greater cooperation in defense and security spheres. I'm just curious, is this aspect, the security and defense, the only aspect that could put our region together, or should there be some other domains where also some change agents can be found? I mean, people who are not obligatory associated with defense, but also can have some agency of their own. And what could be these domains where push for greater regional integration takes place?
But I think this is what I just mentioned. It's mainly about infrastructure and connectivity, but also about energy security and energy independence from Russia. Uh, and and this whole debate on from the Draghi report, the debate about competitiveness via lowering energy prices in Europe, it has a lot to do with the European South. In that respect, I think we could have quite a role to play, our region. And then I would say all the changing geography of industries in Europe, bringing them closer to renewables and to renewable energy sources. I think this is the future of European growth.
Okay. Poland has been promoting for some time, especially during the era in which sovereignist parties were ruling there, the Three Seas initiative as some cooperation initiative that promotes regional integration and better infrastructure connectivity. How do you evaluate the interests of Poland now under Tusk government? To what extent their interest towards greater integration and cooperation in the region remains, and to what extent it's somehow changing?
First of all, the Three Seas initiative did not yield the benefits that it was supposed to. And so, if you look back at the Three Seas initiative, there were a number of summits, a number of projects, but not a large number of projects, which got supported by the Three Seas initiative. So I think all in all, it did not have the catalyst effect it was supposed to have in terms of the integration of the region. I think mainly because of the financing mechanisms, which were not as successful. Which is why I think the current Polish government is not does not put the Three Seas very high on their agenda. On the other hand, you cannot have regional integration without political will. And as I mentioned, the role of Hungary and to an extent of Slovakia especially within the EU context, but also in blocking all the measures and the instruments supporting Ukraine, or trying to block at least. I mean, this role has become detrimental for the regional cooperation in Central and Eastern Europe. And so when you don't have good relations with your neighbors, it is very difficult to create also large infrastructure projects together. And Mr. Orban, of course, is showing that his interests lie elsewhere. So he's much rather building kind of big infrastructure projects with Mr. Vučić, than investing much in this kind of regional cooperation as it was envisaged by the Three Seas.
Okay, you mentioned Ukraine, and Ukraine and Moldova have been candidates for membership in the EU, but recently even Poland had some reserves and advanced some historical issues with Ukraine, which might somehow create obstacles to its integration in the EU. So I want to ask you in this regard, will the candidates for membership from the Eastern Europe start getting some problems the more closer they get to the EU? Will the attitudes which we also saw in Bulgaria and Romania against our accession somehow start to become more visible also with regards to new members which now apply?
I think European public opinion was very much supportive or more supportive towards the enlargement last year than it had been in all the years before the war. Europeans understood very well that there were geopolitical reasons why the EU needed to extend its zone of security to especially Ukraine and Moldova to the east. In that period, also the Western Balkans restarted their efforts. In my view, not energetically enough to come closer to the EU. Right now, it seems that we're in a bit of a plateau in terms of public support, but also in terms of enthusiasm in political elite. So if you look, for instance, at the Austrian Freedom Party, which won the elections in Austria, it is not at all, a friend of enlargement. And so it would be difficult, I think, now to imagine how enlargement, gets accelerated because you have such governments also in other places. You have similar political actors in the Netherlands, in France. You have also the ascending AfD in Germany, which is why I think if we speak about enlargement, we should actually talk and think about it in smaller steps, so that this is not a binary process. You're either out or you're in, but there are elements to it that you can adopt, and you can become part of certain levels of integration, but then not be part of in others. For instance, the common agricultural policy, which, as you remember, caused a lot of kind of public pushback in Poland against the Ukrainian agricultural production. And not only in Poland, there were 6 countries in Central and Eastern Europe who signed this memorandum back then. Bulgaria was one of them. Our countries are not going to probably to allow Ukraine with its huge agricultural sector to become part of the common agricultural policy the way it is structured now. So this is going to wait for quite some time. On other issues, like, for instance, Erasmus or I don't know, roaming and so on, there will be special kind of track for those countries so that they're able to join and to participate.
We have been observers and maybe living a political crisis in Bulgaria which lasts for too long. and just in a short time, Bulgaria will vote for its 7th parliamentary elections in 3 years. How is this political crisis related also to difficulty to form majority, to adopt laws, to implement reforms? Even in a way, maybe state functions at a lower level than its potential. How is that influencing Bulgaria's role and activity in the EU and in the region?
First of all, I think we have to ask how it influences Bulgarian citizens. And the fact of the matter is that Bulgarian economy has been growing, and Bulgarian citizens do not really feel very much hurt by the ongoing inability of Bulgarian politicians to take responsibility. And here I immediately have to say that I'm talking about part of the of the Bulgarian political parties, because there has been a clear winner gap for the last 3 elections, and they have constantly denied the responsibility to form a government. So in a way, I mean, I feel we have to attribute, if there is somebody's fault, we have to attribute that fault in a correct way and not just say all the politicians. So because Bulgarians are not worried about the power vacuum, the price for it continuing is actually not high, the political price. So I would not be surprised if Gerb decides not to form a government yet again after the next election, simply because they do not need to take any responsibility. But given that the caretaker government is largely influenced by them, they can take some of the benefits, so to say, from it. In terms of Europe, Bulgaria looks like a place which does not want to govern itself, a country that is giving up its own kind of statehood, or at least its own ambition to produce a political process which is kind of constructive. For the region, I think our neighbors think that this is not that much of a change, given that the last 3 Borisov governments, which were the last governments that kind of fulfilled almost full mandate, with 1 or 2 exceptions, were not very active in terms of foreign policy, in terms of regional policy. So, I mean, with the exception of the Macedonian veto, which the last Borisov government imposed, there is very little that one can say about Bulgaria's role in the region. So I would say for Europe, this is, if we talk about, different waves of integration or different areas of integration, Bulgaria is moving closer towards the periphery in terms of integration, not in terms of geography. And for our neighbors, I think it's basically more of the same, maybe with the exception of the two political governments by Petkov and Denko.
You mentioned that Borisov government imposed some blockade on North Macedonia. You were involved in the overcoming of this blockade, and that happened thanks to the so-called French proposal for the resolution of the situation at that time. Now there is another proposal by Viktor Orban to be some kind of mediator between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. Do you expect that after relying on France for some kind of support, Bulgaria could switch to Hungary for some kind of support also in relations with North Macedonia?
I am not aware of the substance of a proposal by Hungary. The only thing I have read in the media is that Mr. Orban wants to be in a picture together with a Bulgarian and a Macedonian leader. But what this meeting is supposed to achieve, I haven't seen, I haven't read. So from a Bulgarian perspective, I think there is very little that Mr. Orban can achieve and can bring to the table, simply because it's Bulgaria's position now that, and has been since 22, that this is a EU issue that is supposed to be dealt with by North Macedonia. So until the parliament in Skopje passes the changes in the constitution, there will be little progress. And I do not believe that any Bulgarian leader is going to want to kind of renegotiate the negotiating framework offered to North Macedonia by the EU. And frankly, this was about much more about minority rights than anything else. And this is the progress on those rights is trackable, and as long as there is no significant progress, I don't think anybody's mediation is going to be useful there.
Okay, and finally, I have again a question on Bulgaria. You probably follow our media. My own feeling is that there is a lot of national-centric approach in what we have as media or as public discussions. So I'm curious whether some greater ambition for going outside of Bulgaria could appear in Bulgarian society for knowing neighbors or other countries in the region, in the EU. What do you think are the chances that Bulgaria somehow become less introvert in the forthcoming years and develop some really ambition to be part of something wider, either the region or the EU, or if you wish, even the world, just overcoming what I see as national-centric thinking?
I think these days most of the debates in Europe are national-centric, and this is probably only natural if people are worried, if their politicians use those fears for political gains, and I think this is broadly also the issue here. You also have, of course, a tradition of um, focusing on the inside, simply because a lot of the people who were in power, they, they're not interested in the rest of the world. Some of them don't even, speak foreign languages. And so when you have this level of mediocrity in your leadership, then people who know more or have wider interests, most of the time try to stay away from media and from public attention, simply because they kind of seem out of tune. How all of this will change, I think, if we start electing, first of all, people who know what options there are for Bulgaria in the regional and the European context. That is going to be very helpful for the development of our economy, of our culture, of our education, and so on. But also, we have quite a number of painful reforms to do. And I think most probably we will need help to make those reforms possible. We now see, for instance, that in the Recovery and Resilience Pact, there is this condition for Bulgaria to reform its anti-corruption commission and the General Prosecutor's institution. These are concrete reforms for which the EU is basically creating an incentive for us, an incentive in the form of 6 billion euro. This is quite a lot of money. So I think that inevitably Bulgaria will kind of have to move towards reforms and towards more kind of European focus and debates.